It is Friday. Yay. Welcome to the Sunshine State Happy Hour, powered by Bravadus Media and Florida Beer Media. And you can actually find us now at floridabeermedia.com because I spent some time and built that site out, which is great. You can see everything that we have going on. So of the podcasts that I listen to, I can always say that after I listen to our next guest's podcast, I want a bourbon. And I really shouldn't, because if I drink anything stronger than beer, I cough quite a bit, as anybody who's watched this show and seen my exploits with my man friend Malort over here can tell you. Gentlemen, have you seen this yet?
No,
I have not. No.
Okay, well, it's
we'll put it on the to-do list.
Do you really want to? Do you really want to?
You tell me. Not a lot of it missing out of that bottle.
No, there isn't. That's the thing. It's
I feel like I've heard the name.
Oh yeah, it's a Chicago thing.
Okay.
Drep and Stone Podcast, Kyle and Nick, how you doing? Okay, so Malort. Malort tastes. Somebody told me this, and it's a great quote. Malort tastes like Advanced Auto Parts smells. If you could drink that smell, that rubber smell mixed with pencil shavings and highlighter, that's Malort.
We're constantly looking for ways to describe beers, describe bourbons, and that's perfect. We're totally taking that.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely amazing. And it's funny because I was listening to one of your shows and you had this bourbon and you built it up and you built it up and you built it up. And then you released the fact that it was only $10 and that the taste literally dissipated after a second and a half in your mouth. And I'm like, do I want to go there? Do I not want to go there? I don't know. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
you're more than welcome. And you're not drinking bourbon. You're not drinking whiskey. You're drinking beers with us.
We are.
Nick, you've got a giant growler and a sippy straw. And
well, I do. I have a growler. I got a growler. Let me put it up to the camera there.
Nice.
Got a growler from Grove Roots. They're in Winter Haven, Florida, kind of right there in the middle of the state.
They're the ones that are maybe right across the street from Legoland, right?
They're maybe about ish. They're maybe about a 5-10 minute drive. I mean, if you're in Legoland area, they're not far, and definitely I think we would both recommend popping on over there.
Nice.
But I've got their German Pilsner, Sunset Catch.
Man, the Pilsner seems to be having just a massive resurgence right now.
I think I think it has a lot to do with kind of the IPA boom from a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. And people, you kind of had the IPA boom, and then you went to everyone wanting hazies and pushing sours, and now I think it's kind of a return back to normal beer, if that's a way to say
it. That makes perfect sense. It's funny that you mentioned that, and I definitely will ask you this question. With the quarantine, a lot of breweries have mentioned they are kind of taking the time because they don't need to produce as much, and they are lagering much more than they ever had before.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you had seen and heard?
Just to kind of backlog it to make sure that they're not, producing as much product that, they have to push out right now.
Exactly.
I haven't
heard tanks a little longer.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't seen anything necessarily, but that makes total sense. I mean, especially with uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. And Kyle, you are actually chiming in from Alabama.
Oh yeah.
You got some return
North Alabama.
You got some return to ale that you're going to be bringing back with us for you?
There's a couple of really great breweries up here that when I'm up here, I load up for sure and bring it back down.
I know Good People's up there. Trying to think who else is there. Yeah, if you ever listen to the podcast, if you ever look at us, there's a brewery that's in planning in Pensacola called Alga Beer Company, but they actually live in Alabama. And so
very cool.
Some time ago, they sent me a huge case of beers, and it's like, oh, so much awesome
Very
stuff.
nice.
But I know you got
We got to get on that mailing list, Kyle.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, right.
But I know you got the red 2 cases. I know you got the red Solo Cup. What is in said red Solo Cup?
Well, this is actually from a beer in Florence, Alabama. It's called the Singing River Brewery, and I'm drinking their IPA, their Apocalypse Now. It's delicious.
Nice.
Yeah, we did an episode on that one. I don't know, quite a little while ago, and it is a great beer.
Nice. I kind of went a little crazy because I've had this bottle for quite some time, and if you remember Lucky's, the old Lucky's Market, which recently died, they had actually partnered with Darwin Brewing Company for their Big Deal series. This was the last one that they actually made, so it's a blood orange. Blood orange.
Did you get some of that closeout? Those closeout deals.
Oh man, I gotta.
Oh wow, look at that.
Yeah, I know. Get the light on there. Yeah, I got a 6-pack for $250, I think. Not of this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I guess my big question is, what do you usually go for at the end of the day? Do you go for a bourbon or do you go for a beer?
I'll let Kyle start.
I'll let you start, Nick.
Bourbon questions I have to ask.
Actually, we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, and it's kind of, there's a process that I think at least I go through, and I know just obviously having conversations with Kyle, he does the same thing, and you kind of like, what is today? Is today a beer day? Okay, you kind of like, okay, maybe it is a beer day, or is today a bourbon day? And it varies so much. I think for me personally, I'll start with a beer because I know that I can, if I want to continue the night, I can later, and it's easier to kind of go down that higher proof route.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had this exact conversation, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we just kind of went through our process. I mean, I know for me, I'm usually whiskey forward. I'm usually going to grab that bourbon first, but we said on the podcast, like if it's with the meal, I'll tend to go with a beer. I think they just kind of, the flavors pair a lot better. But if it's like post meal, it's definitely a bourbon.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
And with bourbons, please forgive me because I am going to mine your brains for information because I am curious about this. Obviously, with beer, there's a lot of different styles. We're drinking 3 very different kinds of beer, but they are all still quintessentially beer. With bourbon, is bourbon just bourbon? Like, here you go. Or are there different variations, different strengths, things that you can really look for being a bourbon aficionado for a daytime bourbon, a nightcap bourbon, so on?
Well, I mean, in our first couple of episodes where we kind of talked about our kind of philosophy and drinking and stuff, like we kind of went over the fact that bourbon is so specifically what makes a bourbon, it's very well defined. Like it has to be new charred oak barrels. It has to be aged for this amount of time. It doesn't necessarily have to be made in Kentucky, but it does have very strict rules on it that make it a bourbon. Mm-hmm. So, I think a lot of what we do and what we try to discover are the bourbons and things that do stick out. The ones that are more unique and have a little bit of a different profile than just kind of your regular bourbon.
Yeah, I mean, and bourbon is such an American spirit. I mean, it kind of is the American spirit, and it's so interesting just to see the variations. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle, but in order to be called bourbon, it has to be at least 51% corn. And you can have you can have variations after that grain, but it has to be at least 51% corn. So if you see something like a rye, you're looking on your liquor store shelf and you see a rye, that could be either 100% rye, or it can be a higher rye bourbon. So that extra 49% or whatever has to be made with some sort of rye, but 51% corn, and that's what it's distilled from, and then you've got technically bourbon.
And I know that it's got to be a virgin barrel, obviously charred, but it can only be used once, which is why so many breweries obviously get their hands on bourbon barrels, and you see all sorts of barrels from all sorts of places. So being bourbon fans, when you see a bourbon barrel aged beer, is that something that you will naturally gravitate towards?
For me, I like them, but if I'm going to drink bourbon, I'm going to drink bourbon. There's a lot of breweries that do the Kentucky barrel age type beers, and they tend to be really overly sweet for me. And I like those bourbon flavors out of it, but it just, because they're trying to, maybe it's pushing that ABV, because it's rare to find one of those less than 10%, that it just gets really sweet.
Yeah, I mean, the experience that we've had with the bourbon beers, they I don't want to say it's been unpleasant, but they are kind of more of almost like an event beer, where it's not, you don't want to sit down and drink 3 or 4 of them. It's just more of an experience, and something you kind of need to pair it with to kind of really pull out the flavors and really enjoy it. Something
tells me there's a story there. I don't know if I'm about to hear the story, but I smell a story from that.
So to make it really quick, I purchased a 4-pack of Lagunitas. Did a collaboration with the Willett Willett Distillery in Kentucky, and we both like Willett products. I mean, we've had the pot still, we've had the Family Estate Rye, so we really like those products. But the Lagunitas,
and we love Lagunitas,
and we love Lagunitas.
It seems like a marriage ready to go.
Absolutely. But they did they called it the Willetized Coffee Stout, and it was a 4-pack, and there are still 3 in Kyle's fridge.
Okay.
So,
jeez.
I mean, and we love Willett, and we love Lagunitas, but this one just, for whatever reason, just didn't do it for us, which happens.
It's just one of those things, like, you could probably have paired it with something that would, complement it so well and make it amazing. But for what it was, just what we were doing as just like a tasting of it, it was intense for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some that get pretty out there. I have a bottle somewhere of a 2013 Goose Island that I am scared to touch. My wife will drink it. My wife is good on stuff like that. Me, I'm a complete and total pansy.
I think I have the 2018 or 2019 stashed away somewhere, and it's one of those, like, I want to do it, and I want to do it on the podcast, but I also do I really?
No, that's a good point. But of course, you live in Florida, and if there's any particular spirit that this state is known for, that spirit is rum. Because
Absolutely.
We've got a lot of sugar cane around here. Do you generally touch rum?
Kyle?
Whether it be in a drink or mixed with Sprite and whatever.
In the truest like Florida sense, like, rum is it's a staple at the pool or at the beach. Like, you mix it with some juice, and, like, for sure, like, it's something that we've meant to, I think, get into more specifically, in what we do. But yeah, I mean, for us, I know at our house, it's absolutely a staple.
Yeah.
Nice.
I've recently gotten into tiki drinks here, since this quarantine happened, and it's opened a whole new world that I had no idea. You think of rum, and, you think of maybe the big 3, big 2.
Yeah.
But when you start to really look at rum, there are so many different varieties, so many different kinds. It's deep. It's deep.
And what's amazing is that you're really starting to see those craft rum distilleries here in the state of Florida. Wicked Dolphin's been a great friend of Florida Beer Media, and I know I've got a beer that was aged in a Drum Circle distilling barrel somewhere in the back there. So are there any specific distilleries, whether it be rum or anything else from the state of Florida, that you are particularly fond of? Because I don't think there's a whole lot of bourbon that's being made down here, if I'm correct.
So there's one that I don't know the whole story, but I do know that Horse Soldier Bourbon or whiskey, I can't remember. They're out of, or at least they have a facility in St. Pete. I'm not sure if they're right now distilling out of that facility or if they're, moving eventually to that facility. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but having been by that facility, it's brand new. I don't even know if they've actually officially opened yet. But Horse Soldier is definitely one that kind of off the top of my head, Florida wise, that I really enjoy.
Trying to think, I've currently got a bottle from, is it Saratoga? You remember, Nick?
I don't remember.
I think because Florida is just kind of now getting into the bourbon conversation, that, it's like you're saying, there's not a lot to really go out and experiment with. I've had I want to say it's the Palm Key, maybe, whiskey. It was really great. I really enjoyed it. The bottle that I've got from it's not Saratoga. I'm blanking on it, but you can kind of taste the newness to it. Like it doesn't really taste like it's really aged and it's had history to it. It tastes new, and I think it's just kind of more of a, as whiskey kind of grows and develops within the state, you're gonna get a lot more variations and things like that, more experimentation, and they're gonna find those flavors for sure.
There's a really popular bourbon. It's called Clyde Mays, and it's actually they call it an Alabama bourbon or an Alabama whiskey, and it's actually distilled here in Polk County. It's marketed as an Alabama whiskey, but it's distilled here in Polk County.
Yep. What's it called again?
Clyde Mays, Alabama. I want to say it's whiskey, Alabama whiskey, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. And it's distilled
right here. Great product, Speckled Tail, right out of Auburndale.
Interesting.
Oh man,
yeah, Clyde Mays Alabama whiskey. There we go. Yeah. So, how close are you to Auburndale? Because you kind of mentioned, you are in Polk County, and there's a number of special things that tend to come out of Polk County on a regular basis. Special shout out to Florida Man Podcast. I know they love Polk, but it's actually got some interesting beers there. In fact, the one place in Auburndale that I am a big fan of was Brew Pop.
Yeah. Brew Pop right in Auburndale. Here in Polk County, we have a fair amount of breweries, and they're starting to kind of get some traction, and it tends to happen, as with most things between Tampa and Orlando, it tends to be a little slower here. We've got two big ones, Grove Roots, which is the one I'm drinking from, and Swan Brewing out of Lakeland. Yeah. And then you have kind of a few things here and there popping up.
Interesting. So it's really starting to grow a little bit more.
It is. I think it's getting a little bit of traction. My wife and I actually just the other day, we went to a brewery in Bartow, Florida, which is, kind of, if Polk County is middle of nowhere, Florida, this is middle of nowhere. And sorry, Bartow. But front page brewing.
There's a reason you haven't heard of it.
Yeah. It's the county seat, but Front Page Brewing there in Bartow, brand new, maybe 2 or 3 months old. I think they opened right before the quarantine, and they're killing it out there. It's good.
Nice. Now I was going to ask, in terms of everything that you've heard, how have the businesses that you follow and the businesses that are around you in Polk County been surviving or not surviving, as the case may be, through the quarantine?
Man, the businesses that we would, I guess more you're talking like local businesses, restaurants and things like that we've seen. It's more or less the deals that they're trying to offer. They're coming up with some pretty fantastic deals, and it's just whether or not it's something that you can dig into your pocket to go take advantage of. But the deals are amazing.
Yeah. It's been really interesting to see how these businesses, these breweries, restaurants, how they kind of shift. And it's been interesting to see the ones that have shifted function really well, and those who are kind of trying to, just hang on and figure out what to do. I mean, I think that around here, businesses just run the gambit. You have people who are still killing it, and you have people who are just barely hanging on.
Interesting. Yeah, I've just taken a look. Unfortunately, Brew Pop is not one of them.
I think Brew Pop shuttered maybe about a year ago.
Yeah, I'm taking a look. There's something happened, dude. There's some non-disclosure agreements and other legal obligations. So that was a shame because I remember visiting them, and that was one of those kind of breweries where it was never going to be the next big thing. They were only going to do their thing, but gosh darn it, they did their own thing and they did it well.
Obviously for us here in Polk County, Auburndale is just right down the road, and it was a style, the party guile style, this using yeast over and over, kind of building up that yeast tolerance, eventually getting an interesting beer. And for us, or at least for me, I don't know if they understood the market here in Polk County. Yeah. Because, in Polk County, you got a lot of light beer drinkers, and they want that kind of stuff. And when you're pushing boundaries, which is really cool for, beer geeks like us. Yeah. But, it doesn't always translate well towards a larger market. And I think that maybe that's probably what did them in too.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was going to say, it's got to be difficult for anybody wanting to open a brewery in Polk County, knowing who's in the next county over. Because obviously you're not too worried about Orlando, but when it comes to craft beer, the light tends to shine first on Tampa. Yeah. And it's got to be difficult to be in that sort of shadow.
I mean, the shadow of Hillsborough and Pinellas, that's so difficult. I mean, you've got huge names in St. Pete all the way up to Tarpon Springs and Dunedin and into Tampa. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that, Kyle mentioned this earlier about things for us that stand out. And I think that the more successful breweries tend to do things like, they'll have their staples or they'll have their stuff that's maybe easier drinking, but then they know for a certain crowd, we have to push this a little further. We have to do things that push that envelope, which is really cool, especially here for Polk County.
Yeah, you almost have to play that card of, we're not the biggest, but we're right next to it.
It's like the Yankees and the Mets. Like, if you're the Mets, I can see Yankee Stadium. It's over there, and we're here.
Yeah, we're like that. We're really good too.
Yeah,
we're not play ball.
For sure. Well, I was almost going to say, in terms of size, you obviously did not mention Brew Hub, and it kind of is the 800-pound gorilla of craft beer in the state. Yeah. Whether regardless of how you feel about them, they're definitely not easy to ignore. But how would you sort of describe them? Because it's sort of an interesting foot in both worlds sort of a situation.
Yeah, Brew Hub, and I haven't been in a couple of years, but when they first opened, they were kind of really touting themselves as, we're going to make our own beer, but we're also going to be a smaller brewery kind of hub, obviously beer hub. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, one of my favorite breweries out of St. Pete, Cycle Brewing, they're actually brewing all of their stuff larger format canned in Brew Hub or at Brew Hub. In fact, I know that I know that because we literally just recorded an episode yesterday, and that's the beer I chose, and it says St. Pete, Florida, Lakeland, Florida on it.
Yeah.
And thinking about that, if a company can give a leg up to small brewers, I can't see the downside necessarily in terms of, we want to help distribute you guys. We want to help give you, a wider distribution. My concern always is, where then do you start to sacrifice locality, sacrifice quality for distribution? Because we've seen that constantly over and over again in small breweries.
We were actually kind of talking about it before the show started. And it's funny because I always take a look at distilled spirits. I always take a look at things like bourbon and rum. And you can have a very large distribution footprint from a very small operation, because you make one big batch and you've got a ton of bottles that you can spread far and wide. Whereas with beer, it's like you mentioned, the only reason that cycle is over here is because they partnered with this ultra massive brewing behemoth that's able to brew and package and ship on the scale that is needed.
Yeah. And Kyle and I have talked about this a little bit on the podcast, kind of about the locality of beer. And for me, and I think I can speak for both of us, for me, beer is so egalitarian. It's something that, you look at places like Colorado and Portland and California, these kind of like big beer meccas in terms of the craft beer movement. And you've got small little local breweries that no one's heard of unless you've been there.
Yeah.
And I think that the majority of breweries that are doing that thing, they kind of, we know what we're doing. We're doing it for our area. If you're here and you like it, that's awesome. But I don't know, Dave, if you've ever been to Pinellas Ale Works, which is in St. Pete.
Oh yeah.
And man, there, Kyle and I actually went there in October for my wife's birthday. We did like a pedal pub. Yeah. And man, Pinellas Ale Works, they kill it. Yeah. And they don't really seem to want to get bigger than what they are.
Yeah, Dennis is perfectly happy. He's fine. And you go there and you take a look at his tap list, and it's all correct styles. It's kind of what you mentioned before. It's that sort of fight against going for big 15% desserty, fruity, whiz bang, cherry, and umbrella on top sort of beers. He would never do that, but he's got, Dunkels and Pilsners and Martins, and it's amazing the clean styles that he has, and he has so many of them.
Oh yeah. And they're just, it's great. And that's a market that's really saturated. So you got to kind of find that niche and just do it.
I desperately need a haircut. I'm just noticing that in this thing. It's awful. So I guess if you were to make yeah, but I know James. Yep. Oh, there we go. Here's got another Pinellas Ale Works fan. I'll tell you, that's the amazing thing about St. Pete, even over Tampa. Like if you park in front of Pinellas Ale Works, you can literally walk across the street to Cage, and then down behind the corner is Three Daughters, and in front of that is If I Brewed the World.
Avid's right. I think Avid. Is it Avid? Ah, man. I might be getting that wrong. But there's within, I don't know, maybe 5-6 blocks, you can have a great day.
It's amazing.
Instead of walking, though, you can do the pedal pub and you can have a heart attack before you get there. Fantastic.
We did that like late October, Kyle, maybe early November. And we're like, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be beautiful out. Nope. And as Floridians, we should have known.
And nasty.
Yep.
It was swampy. Just out there pedaling and pouring sweat and like, I just want a beer.
So speaking of crying and being swampy, let's talk about your podcast for a little bit.
Okay. That's perfect.
Well, yeah, I guess
segue.
That's the best segue I've ever done. I'm so proud of myself.
Nailed it.
Because it's great if you've never listened to Drep and Stone. They basically open up a beverage, and they have a great, deep philosophical conversation about that beverage, and then the beverage sort of takes over, and it just pedals its way towards a crying, sad, sweaty ending. How did you get?
I see what you did there.
Yeah, it's
oh man.
Hey,
it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
It's tough. It's so tough. I'm sorry. We could talk about your question.
No, I was gonna say, how did you get started doing it, and where can I get one of those microphones? Because I can definitely tell who's at their home studio with the good equipment and who's recording on the laptop in the bathroom. It's
Well, nobody flushed. I think for us, the genesis of it was, the two of us, we like to hang out together. Oh, did we lose somebody? Did I lose somebody?
We lost you for a
no.
little bit. Oh, there he goes. So, Kyle.
Bye, Nick. I'll take over the response on that one. The podcast, it more or less just kind of grew out of, Nick and I worked together for a good number of years, and it was we talked about it in our very first episode. It was like an excuse for us to have a better opportunity to hang out, where it wasn't just like getting together to have a dinner or go play golf or whatever. It was more of like a regimented, now we've got to do this. It's part of the podcast. It gave us an excuse to get together. But we've we talked together in the education field for a long time, and it was, we'd had so many conversations and different discussions that it was just like we both enjoy the idea of a podcast, and we're like, let's give it a shot. I think we could do this.
I don't know what Kyle said, but I agree with all of it.
All right. What you both used to
paid for by Drep and Stone for podcast.
Sorry, Dave, what was that?
What you both used to teach?
Kyle taught art and I taught English.
Nice. Social studies.
So. Oh, nice. There you go.
It's amazing how much.
Look where we are now.
Yeah, I know, right?
We've
and it's funny. There's actually a beer and education podcast out there.
Yeah, there's actually a bunch of them.
Really?
That was actually like a really interesting thing on our journey to create our podcast. Is like every idea that we had, it was like taken. All right, let's try this angle. Taken. Nope. Okay, let's try this. Okay, cool. We found something. All right, this is what we're going to name it. Taken.
Yeah.
It was like, it's such a broad, it's all being done by somebody somewhere.
Yeah. So we're just kind of throwing darts and hoping something would work.
I'm still amazed that I was able to get Florida Beer Blog. I figured that had disappeared years and years ago, and nobody took it.
Yeah.
Nobody took Florida Beer Podcast. I'm like, okay, mine.
And kind of as a side note, congratulations. Yesterday you released, Dave, that you guys started FloridaBeerMedia.com. Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, because basically it's Florida Beer Blog, which has been in existence for 6 years now.
Wow.
The Florida Beer Podcast grew as an outshoot of that. And then the Lager Layover podcast kind of grew as the Not Florida podcast. And then we started this show, and Steve, who's hopefully here, yay, we're going to do another show, which is just us drinking beers and watching those old 50s social programming films like Lynchroom Manners and A Date with Your Family. Because that's what I like
more
to
than
watch.
one way to skin a cat.
Yeah, I know, exactly. So it's like, okay, here we go. Yay, let's pop it all together and get some pretty so yay. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. That's really cool, and that's a big deal too, pushing that forward.
Yeah, it's interesting to see everything that's going on. And somebody mentioned, like, you talk about some of the earlier power outages and things that have happened in history, and the baby boom that happened 9 months later. Now everybody in August is going to announce their new podcast.
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So I've already got
the most popular name of 2021. What's your baby's name? Podcast.
Yeah. I still feel like the word of 2020 for me is curbside.
Oh God.
It's like, yes.
Yeah.
Curbside is like literally my favorite thing in the world now.
It's your twin's name. Curbside and pickup.
Actually, if you want to get, there's curbside pickup and then her sister social distancing.
Right. She's the uglier one. Get out of here.
Wow.
Oh man.
So that actually kind of dovetails into I know. Or bourbon or two. Some of that stuff.
That's next.
Oh, Malort. Yeah. We got the Malort on deck.
It's a Chicago thing. If you go to Chicago, everybody sort of knows, and it's.
I feel like a good buddy from Chicago, and I've totally heard of Malort. Now that you mention it,
I feel like it was in like a Bourdain episode or something. Like,
Oh, probably. probably.
We're going drinking. What are you drinking? Malort. Oh, okay.
And it's actually kind of funny. We had an interview with Revolution Brewing in Chicago on this show a couple weeks ago. 2 days before the interview went live, they had just announced that the people that make Malort, because it's a Chicago thing, made a special variant using their IPA. Which, yeah, so that's like...
I'd try it.
Oh, yeah, I'll try anything once. You can only, what's the worst? The hospital? Come on, sure.
Been there, done that, paid for it.
Exactly.
So why not?
But that'll kind of, it was a good dovetail, and then we sort of went off the rails slightly. So I will head back to the final question that I ask everybody who comes on this show, because, like we mentioned with the curbside pickup and everything, there have been a lot of changes that breweries have had to make to get through the social distancing and everything that we're kind of experiencing right now. But once we are back to normal, once everything is fine and we can go back to life as it was, are there any changes that you have seen breweries make, or that you've heard about breweries that make, that you feel should be a part of craft beer from here on out? That's just a great idea. It should never go away.
Wow. You just threw that one at us, huh?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I threw that one at us.
I'm gonna let Nick respond to that one. Whatever you think, Nick.
Thanks, Kyle. I think that overall, in terms of what I've seen, not only breweries here in Florida, but breweries all across the country, they tend to be some of the cleanest food service establishments I've ever been to. I mean, even your kind of like your smallest little craft brewery in nowhere, Rhode Island, which I've been to. I mean, literally is the size of a bedroom, and it's spotless. And I'm sure that, there's people screaming at their computer or their phone right now saying, well, I know a brewery, but I would say that breweries just need to keep doing that and keep telling people, the product that we make is some of the most sanitized product. I mean, obviously, yeah, you go through all the boiling and you do all that, but I mean, anyone who's ever home brewed knows that if you're not constantly sanitizing, you're screwed. And I think that breweries, that they should really push that forward. I know in terms of what I've seen, they're really trying to say, this is what we're doing. We're sanitizing everything, which is nothing different than they've always done, but just making that known. I think that's a huge thing that they should just continue to tell everybody that.
I'm thinking about like all the distilleries that, halted production and started making hand sanitizer.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, my marketing, gears are like, oh, we could start, all right, so this is our 2019 hand sanitizer. Everybody wants to get a bottle of that. Coming around is 2020, 2021. This is our barrel-proof hand sanitizer. Make sure you pick that up.
Look at this fancy bottle.
Right? It's in a glass bottle. Whoa, what did you just open? Hand sanitizer.
3 different variants of labels. Collect them all.
Exactly.
It's gonna happen. All right. Oh my goodness. I need something else to drink. Kyle, Nick from the Drep and Stone Podcast, thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. Obviously, we're going off for the weekend. Next week, we're going to have a lot of interesting shows Monday through Friday, and we're actually going to stay in Polk County with a talk with the head of the Florida brewery, which is in Auburndale, and took over an old Coca-Cola bottling plant, if I'm correct.
That is correct. Yep.
Yeah, you've both been there, right?
Right down the street. Yep.
And that's good stuff, right?
It's good. Can't wait to see that episode. That's going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some other excellent episodes, including Crooked Rooster, all the way up in North Florida, just below the Georgia line, and the Bitch Beer Podcast, which is, I get to say bitch, because I usually don't curse on this show. Like they were saying before, you can find us at floridabeermedia.com. We're on InstaWebs and Twittergram at Florida Beer Blog or Lager Layover, but Florida Beer Media has everything. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming out, and I really do appreciate it, and we will talk to you all soon. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Dave. You too.
Cheers.
Cheers.